12. I'm going to try and get through 2 dot points today. We're going to go through it a little bit more in class. The first one being early discoveries and changing nature of excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries. There are a few archaeologists and people that work on the sites of Pompeii and Herculaneum. We're going to just cover a few of the important ones today, and we'll cover a few more of them in class. Here are some of the important terms from this dot point. Again, rather than me reading what you can already read, you can just pause it and have that time to look over it. The first one, and arguably one of the ones most important that I really want you to burn into your brain, is Giuseppe Fiorelli. He essentially, after a time when Pompeii is discovered and Herculaneum are discovered and people are essentially looting and taking everything, and it's all about what objects you can take and I guess sell, it kind of starts to change once he's appointed, who is genuinely trying to excavate the site with a degree of care. He's got a number of contributions. He's extremely famous, and it's largely on him that we have the plaster casts of the bodies of Pompeii today. That is from Giuseppe Fiorelli. A few things that he contributed and his methods. On the whole, he's very systematic. He didn't just haphazardly, go nuts and start digging. He attempted to be quite systematic in how he organized the site and how he excavated the site. Okay, so very quickly back onto the plaster. Essentially, when the bodies were buried, the bodies essentially were covered, and inside of this ash and other stuff that they're covered with, the bodies essentially decompose inside and the imprint is left. This is where Giuseppe poured in the famous plaster into the voids, and they essentially hardened, and that's what we were left with. He also tried to divide the city into regions, insulae, which are kind of city blocks, which he numbered buildings and names. And before that, people had all of these different names for different buildings and different streets and all that kind of stuff, which got quite confusing. So he's really trying to make an effort to divide the city and organize the city. Okay, he tried as best as possible when on excavating to go in a top-down manner, rather than trying to start from the bottom or get to the bottom and dig your way up. He tried to carefully start from when you see the top surface of the building and then work your way down layer by layer. Okay. You've got August Moore or Mao. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name properly, but that's okay. He has a huge interest in art and architecture. So he really has a focus on the frescoes found around the city, and even kind of divides them into 4 styles, which you can see here, and we'll end up seeing in examples as we uncover the site a bit more. But as you can see, the idea of dating the frescoes also kind of, he works out an option to date the buildings based off of the frescoes. Vittorio Spinazzola. He has a really meticulous approach. So he tries to use photographs as record keeping, which replaced sketching and drawing, which had been the case up until that point. He also really tries, he doesn't just, rather than excavating a whole building, his attempts to excavate the outside first, leaving the interior kind of buried until he felt, well, as best as possible, it was safe to kind of excavate the interior so it didn't collapse. Now, he has been criticised for not being always successful with that, but we'll cover that in class. One of the main things that Vittorio is attributed to is the Via dell'Abbondanza, which is essentially like, think of it like your main street. Think of it like if you've ever been to the Gold Coast and you've had a walk down the main street known as Cavill Avenue. Think of it like that. It's your main street with like your popular shops, and would have been one of the, if not the busiest street. And excavating this main street and the stuff down the street also uncovered a lot of information. He discovered the foolery of Stephanus, which we'll go over in class, and he tried to reconstruct balconies and upper stories of many houses. Okay, then we've got Amedeo Maiuri. Okay, so he tries to recreate interiors of buildings by restoring walls, ceilings, and he tries to leave items in situ, which is as they lie. He essentially ended up turning our sites, Pompeii and Herculaneum, almost like, well, I guess essentially open-air museums that you are walking in. Again, he continued work on the Via dell'Abbondanza. He is attributed with unearthing the amphitheatre and the palestra. They may be very funny, confusing words now, but I promise you by the end of this, you're going to know what they are. We've got some other houses that he worked on, and like he really does play a part in helping Pompeii become internationally renowned. For the last one, essentially, and I think we come back to this towards the end of the topic as well, but in how people have dealt and interacted with the site over time has changed. Obviously, when it was discovered, we had a fairly big period of looting and destruction of both sites. So some things have been taken that we may never be able to fill the gaps in what's been taken. Then it became this glorified kind of treasure hunting kind of it is essentially just treasure hunting, but glorified. It became, well, who discovered this? And, you know, you could be famous for what you did in Pompeii rather than worrying too much about the sites and what we can learn from it. It doesn't really change until Giuseppe kind of takes the helm. And we start to see a little bit more of an organised approach under the appointment of scholars. But we still see a huge focus on the excavation as opposed to the 21st century, where we see more of an effort on conservation and preservation. And then obviously we've got studying both sites, because Herculaneum is very much ignored compared to Pompeii, and then we eventually get to a conservation focus. All right, representations over time. I'll try and make this quick. Here are some terms if you needed to go over them. Okay, essentially speaking, guys, your original interest in it became this like fascination with ancient art and architecture, which Pompeii really filled that gap with. Definitely some Greek and obviously Roman art and architecture present. That was kind of the fascination with it, and looking at the art and the artifacts and all of that kind of stuff. And then obviously you get, you've got Fiorelli's plaster casts, and interpretation and interest start to change, and you go through this romanticized kind of outlook towards the site, and eventually we get to the idea of the humanity of the disaster. How did the people suffer? What did they experience? How can we learn what life was like? And it's looking at the bigger picture rather than just individuals and what they achieved and who found what and who's famous for excavating this or that. That's pretty much it, guys. As I said, a nice quick one. Next video is going to be on the economy.